Today on the Life Science Success Podcast, I'm interviewing Mark Charbonneau. Mark is a biotechnology and R&D leader with cross-functional expertise in live biotherapeutic drug development, mechanistic modeling, computational biology, and biomarker assay development. He integrates technical acumen and emotional intelligence to build high-functioning teams and foster innovation. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so much. So can you tell listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'd love to. Just a little bit of background. I'm originally from the Midwest. I grew up born and raised in mid-Michigan. I went to Michigan State University for my BS in microbiology and molecular genetics. I was a first-generation college grad. And then from there, I didn't know what to do, so ended up going to graduate school, and went to graduate school at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, where I joined the lab of Jeffrey Gordon. And there I was studying the interactions between the gut microbiota of infants and diet, and how those interactions impact growth in the host organism and how that interacts with malnutrition. And so that's where I did my PhD, and that was in computational biology. So I had to do a combination of experimental biology, working with, at the bench with microbes and with germ-free animal models, as well as doing the computational components to make sense of the complex system. And so after I left there, I switched over into the biotech world because I was really interested in translational biology and turning those basic discoveries into something real for patients. And currently I'm at Synlogic Therapeutics, where I lead the quantitative biology team. And at Synlogic, what we're doing is developing engineered live bacterial therapeutics for treating human diseases. And to date, we have mostly a focus for our pipeline on rare inborn errors of metabolism, and in particular in consuming toxic metabolites within the gut. And our team specifically, what we do is combine in vitro and in vivo model systems together with mathematical modeling frameworks to predict the effects of our genetically engineered strains on human disease biology. And really at the core, we're trying to answer the question, can these move the needle or not? And so that's what I'm doing now.
So it sounds to me, there's all of this interest right now in microbiome and everything that everybody's doing. Is a lot of the research that Synlogic is doing and a lot of the sort of impact that they're having tied to that same area?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I come from this microbiome field, and I think that what really drew me to Synlogic is that our approach is a little bit different from some other microbiome companies. There are a lot of them out there, and a lot are having great success, and I'm very happy for them. And I'm looking forward to seeing that technology proven out. But what we're doing at Synlogic is a little bit different in the sense that rather than sourcing naturally occurring microorganisms for their inherent properties that may be beneficial, we're taking an organism, E. coli Nissl, which is a probiotic organism with a long history of safe use in humans, and we're actually engineering it to encode mechanisms that have therapeutic value. So the example I usually give is our program for the treatment of phenylketonuria. So this is a disease where people that have this disease have a mutation that makes it so that they can't break down phenylalanine as a common amino acid. And so we've engineered a strain of E. coli that can hyperconsume phenylalanine within the GI tract, thereby lowering systemic levels. Well, eventually that's what the goal will be, to lower systemic levels of phenylalanine in the body. And so, the approach we're taking is very mechanism driven, and that's what really excites me about it.
Yeah, no, it definitely is interesting to me. And I know that there's one particular guest that I've been pursuing for a while that really does a lot of work in epigenetics. And to me, there's somewhat tied, epigenetics along with, all this work in the microbiome and things like that. And I'm very excited to try and see if we can't get more guests related to, these areas, because I think, that it'll have a longer term impact if we can, figure out how to, kind of feed your body in a way that, more or less makes it healthier at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a field, for the microbiome field, we're really at this juncture where we've been talking about it for quite a long time and doing a lot of academic studies and publishing. And we're at the point where we have to really prove it, right? And show that we can modulate the microbiota in a way that will have beneficial impacts for patients. And there are companies that are starting to do that. Series Therapeutics had a really fantastic phase 3 readout late last year in recurrent C. difficile infection, where they showed a microbiome-directed therapeutic was really efficacious for those patients. And so I think that that's just the tip of the iceberg for the field.
Yeah, absolutely exciting. So the first place that I noticed you was on Twitter, and I noticed these tweets coming in that really kind of hit home for me. I mean, there was one particular one because I've had conversations with clients of mine about kind of translating people from this academic world where they went and pursued their PhD to now, getting a start in biotechnology, right, somewhere. And so, I noticed this this individual, Mark, kind of leveraging Twitter for all the 280 character maximum that it has in several series of tweets. And so, first of all, I guess, what led you to start, tweeting on, sending out tweets on Twitter about the life science field, and what are some of the topics that you covered?
Yeah, sure. So I'm really glad that what I've written on Twitter resonated with you and with some others. I think that means a lot to me. I think stream of consciousness is definitely the way that I would describe it. Like I mentioned at the top, my career path has been kind of a series of happy accidents. Like I went to graduate school because I didn't know what else to do, and that's not a good reason to go to graduate school. It all worked out in the end, so I'm glad for that. But that's I kind of wish I had more perspective on it when I was a student, and so that's what I've been trying to do on social media and Twitter in particular is to kind of share the things. Maybe I'm screaming into the void, but share the things that, to me, things that I've learned over the past several years that would have been really helpful to me as a student. What would I have benefited to know? And I think that that's resonated with some people.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first one, I guess maybe we'll start with the first one, which, more or less is a message about, what is it like working in biotech? So you maybe want to hit some of the key points, and then I do have some follow-up questions for you as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so my first thread that you noticed here is really about that transition from being in academia to working in biotech. And some of these observations I think are more general to science overall, but these are my observations of what it was like for me and for many other people that I know making that switch. And the biggest contrast in my mind between working in an academic lab, in particular if you're a student and you have your own little project, and working in biotech is that when you're in biotech, and specifically when you're in drug development, it's a team sport, right? And everybody's working together on this. It's not the case that you have sort of a stable of individual projects for each person, and you all have to kind of learn to work together and leverage each other's expertise and share the limelight.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting to me because I've seen kind of, both sides where one, yes, it is a team sport. But also, there's a need to kind of, go accomplish this experiment and then come back and provide your results or your data or whatever. But as a whole, so if you're developing a product, there's maybe a series of these tests where you're kind of one part of the relay race, more or less, that has to happen. And seeing that kind of play out, is interesting. Have you seen similar examples?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, a couple of thoughts on this. First, I would say that this isn't entirely unique to biotech. I think that all science is inherently collaborative, and that's something people have pointed out to me on Twitter. So I appreciate that. I think that the relay race is a really great example. You are kind of taking a chunk of it and you're responsible for this part. And then I think the teamwork comes in with just making sure that all the pieces fit together, right? So that, the person who's the project leader or the project manager has to make sure that all these different activities that are going on, and usually in a biotech environment, there are a lot of them and they're moving really fast. And you have to make sure that they're all lined up and everyone's rowing in the same direction so that you kind of end up at your destination. And that's kind of where the teamwork comes into it. But there certainly is, I think, a component of individuality and creativity, even in biotech where you're working in a very team-oriented environment. One of the projects that I'm most proud of that we're working on a publication for now actually is something that was born as a night and weekend project for me, just independently coding on the side, trying to, I think this is a cool application. Can we build in silico models for understanding strain function in the body? And, over time that grew. I was able to demonstrate some value and some translational impact of that approach. And it's become something that's been core to how we approach our programs now.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, especially whenever I think about your role, right, in quantitative biology. One, there's certainly things that you'll do on your own, but there's also stuff where you're trying to figure out, how does this translate back and forth between the lab, right? And so there is both aspects, but I can also, very clearly understand, why somebody in your role inside of any organization, really in biotech, would say, hey, what I see is really a lot of team play and a lot less sort of, individual responsibility as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And, as someone who is relatively new to biotech, coming from an academic environment, and something I've observed in not just myself, but in other colleagues, is we as scientists tend to get really attached to our projects. They're our babies. And that I think is natural, and it's healthy to an extent. But when you're in a biotech environment, particularly in drug development, the objective is to get an asset through into the clinic and to help patients. And in order to do that, to get it from that discovery all the way through development, it requires a whole host of expertise and different skill sets. And the cast of characters that are involved on that project is going to change over time. And I think as a scientist that's involved very early in discovery, it can be the reflex can be, I want to hang on to this. This is my project. And when new people start showing up and being involved and jumping on and talking about this like it's their project, you can get a little territorial. And so I think that part of the adaptation is learning that that's a natural part of these projects as they move towards the clinic. And that actually means if you're seeing new people come on from a clinical or a regulatory perspective that are new to your project, that means your project is successful and it's moving forward. And that's something that should be embraced.
Yeah, absolutely, it should. And so I'm going to switch gears a little bit on you to some of the later statements in the same stream of consciousness was many new scientists are eager to manage people. I guess, can you provide some suggestions for individuals that would like to switch from having their hands on things, but aspire to be a manager? When I look at your career, you're somebody that's definitely walked that walk, right? I mean, you've gone from, the lab to now leading people. And so, somebody that can definitely relate to this area.
Yeah, I think that this is something that many scientists deal with when they transition. I mean, it's true also in academia if you're running your own lab and mentoring students, but in particular in the biotech environment, I think it's a little different. The first question I would ask somebody when they're looking at making that transition from being an individual contributor to being a manager is why. Why is that something that you aspire to? Because I think that that's a really important component of your motivation of why you're going to do it is an important component of how you're going to approach doing that. One thing I've observed is that oftentimes scientists, particularly when they're new to biotech, they kind of observe or they perceive that managing people, managing a team is sort of a status symbol, right? And the bigger your team is, the more important you are, the more things you can get done. And from my perspective, that point of view can be counterproductive. It's not the case that everyone in biotech needs to be a manager or even a full-time manager, right? People who love to work at the bench and love to do the technical work, they bring tremendous value to biotech organizations. And, the lifeblood of any organization like that is data. And, people have to be generating that data. But I think, if you want to become a manager and your reasons for it are because you want to have a bigger impact and you want to, see more aspects of the business, then there's a path to do that. And I think that there's a transition that's involved. I think it can be a little uncomfortable going from an environment where you are measuring your own productivity and I guess worth as a scientist by the data you generate to working through other people and coaching other people. But there's a whole host of skills that can be learned to support that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because the greatest joy that I've gotten out of leading people primarily is seeing them succeed. And so, a lot of that, ties back for me as well that, I certainly loved, having my hands in things. But I love even more, helping others, kind of achieve success through a lot of the experience that I have and being able to just, be an amplifier for them and help lift them up. So, for me, it's been the same sort of journey. It's just, the key reason for me to get into managing people was primarily around, just enjoying that aspect of being around people and teams.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. I mean, and I think that, the most rewarding part of being a manager is when you can see someone who has just tremendous talent and potential, and you're not making them do anything. You're not making them work. All you're doing is just pointing them in the right direction, right? So that they can sort of align their skills and their talents to the needs of the organization and realize their own potential.
Yeah. So the next area of the same tweet was around, if you want to be the boss, you need to be ready for it emotionally. You can't always make popular decisions. It can be lonely, and giving negative performance review is heart-wrenching. I agree with you. I think this area of being a leader, it is a great thing to be a leader, and a lot of people can look at the benefits, but also you being a leader means that, oftentimes you're out front, and you're also, not always the person that's, the most comfortable one in the room, given the fact that, you do have to kind of balance both areas. You have to lead, but you also, need to be able to provide feedback and guidance for people as well.
Yeah, I think that this is really important, and this is one of the things I think as a graduate student or as a new scientist in biotech, I wish somebody would have told me. It's like it's not as easy as it looks, because often you do have to, if you want to be effective as a manager, I believe you have to do the right thing, not necessarily the easy thing. And it's great when those are aligned, but they're often not. When you have to give someone constructive feedback, for example, if there's a performance issue, you're not doing it to be mean. And I think the easy thing is to spare your own feelings and to spare their feelings and just not say anything. But then in the long run, you have to realize that you're causing more damage because you're not repairing the issue. You're not doing that person any favors for their career, and you're not doing your team any favors, because at the end of the day, you're judged based on the results that you're achieving. And so the right thing to do sometimes is the thing that is the least comfortable. And you as a leader, as a manager, have to sort of learn to embrace that and to, to do that right thing.
Yeah, I find it interesting though too that there's so many people in the world, and in part I get it, I guess socially, because of social norms. There's so many people in the world who will, tell somebody that, oh, that feedback that you got was, was strong or wrong, but at the same time they think in the back of their mind, I wish that this behavior that this person had would get corrected.
Yeah.
And I've had people, certainly come to me that appear to, really succeed overall as, phenomenally as individual contributors, yet they want to step into this realm of being a manager, or they want to, drastically change their career, from one thing to the next, where in reality, if you worked on the things that you currently have responsibility for, you truthfully can continue to excel. Where if you make a shift or a change, it puts a lot at risk. And that sometimes, as a leader, you can kind of see that this person's going to struggle if they move from maybe, even if it's a manager of, say, one or two people, kind of back to your point of, it's certainly in most colleges, you wind up, sort of, leading groups of people. But I mean, they're normally smaller groups of people to give you that initial experience. And honestly, if you're struggling there, it's only going to get worse with bigger teams as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. And then, the other aspect that to me wasn't apparent until I was in the position is when you're in those first rungs of management, you're in the middle, right? So you're not only managing down to your team, you're also managing up to the executive team. And sometimes the messages between the two and how you filter information, that can be its own set of challenges. But yeah, I mean, I think you're completely right. And as a manager, it's with the people that are on your team, everyone has their own set of needs and their own set of aptitudes and preferences. And the bar kind of, or the goalpost for success at each level kind of moves a little bit ahead. So generally what you did to get you where you are is not necessarily what you have to do to get you to the next level. And that can be the hardest lesson or feedback to give to members of your team, because they're sort of accustomed to succeeding doing a certain number of things. And you have to help them understand that to get to the next level, if you want to become a manager, or you want to become a manager of a larger set of functions that maybe extend beyond your specific area of technical expertise, there are certain skill sets that you'll have to pick up or behaviors that you'll have to pick up that might be out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it is interesting to have somebody, also come along as a manager and provide kind of that 360, feedback, so that at least you get kind of a balance as a leader of, what it is that people are seeing in you as well, so that you can kind of adjust and, hopefully correct, different behaviors along the way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that consistent feedback is really important. It particularly well, for both positive and constructive feedback. I think it's important to do it early and to do it often. I think the last thing you want to do is tell someone that there's an issue at their performance review. And one of the things I say explicitly to members of my team is, if when we're heading into performance reviews, everyone's nervous. They've written their written assessment and they're going into that meeting. They're really nervous. What is he going to say? I tell them, if there's anything I say to you that's a surprise in this review, I failed, right? Unless it's something that just happened yesterday, then that's my fault, because I should have told you as we were leading up to this.
Yeah. Yeah, it should be an echo chamber, right? Overall of things that they've heard in the past that kind of, do relate back. So the next interesting thing, especially seeing that you're on a podcast and you're so outspoken and things like that, is that you consider yourself an introvert.
I do. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I do. And I think a lot of people are, at least people that I work with, are kind of surprised when I tell them that. They say, well, you're outspoken and, you speak up in meetings and you have your voice heard and you manage people and those sorts of things. And when I was younger, I think that I thought about introversion and extroversion in kind of a simplified way, where I thought that an extroverted person was a loud person, someone who spoke a lot and who had the skills to navigate social situations really effectively, and introverts were shy, right? And that's why I was an introvert. But I read a really fascinating book by Susan Cain that's called Quiet, and I strongly recommend that for anyone, especially if you're an introvert, because it'll reframe your thinking about introversion. And the way that the author puts it is that introverts and extroverts respond to social stimuli, situations differently. It's not really about their social skills, right? Because social skills can be learned. Extroverts in general come away from social situations energized. They can use that interaction to sort of charge their batteries. Whereas introverts and people like me find social interactions draining. So yes, I'm doing this podcast, but when it's over, I'm going to have to take a nap, because at the end of a long day of meetings, the only thing I want to do is just be alone and recharge my batteries.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to me because, I would say somewhat the same. However, the one thing that I would say that I've probably learned over time is sort of, larger presentations and larger environments. I use those environments to kind of energize myself. So, I mean, although I somewhat consider myself an introvert as well, I also don't get a lot of social energy from crowds where, you listen to, good example would be musicians. Whenever they say after a concert, they have this, sort of level of euphoria and they get a lot of a big boost from doing it. On the other hand, I have to wonder as well, given the work that you do, is more of the sort of draining part of it that you're using your brain maybe in a different way, instead of entirely just being creative. You're having to also think on your feet and think about things and positioning things in a specific way because of your background.
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I think that the what I mentioned about extroverts being people who have the social skills. So I'm an introvert who's picked up some social skills, like at least enough to get by, right? But using them, flexing that muscle all day long, particularly when you're code switching a lot, you're going from meeting A where you're talking to project team, about their next deadline for declaring a clinical candidate, right? And then you're in your next meeting 5 minutes later and you have to be talking with the clinical operations team about some biomarker assay. You're switching gears. You have a different set of stakeholders. You have a different set of what's important to them, their priorities in terms of what the company's doing. And you have to balance all those things and juggle them around. And I think you're right that switching gears like that so often, I think maybe I'm like a manual transmission or something. Like it gets caught up, right? And by the end of the day, I just get kind of tired.
Yeah, I completely can understand and relate to that as well. I mean, it's I've facilitated a fair amount of large group sessions to try and work through key issues, or even work through processes at an organization to try and work through an end result. And oftentimes my brain is trying to stay on pace with what everybody's working on, but also stay a little bit ahead so that I can facilitate. Otherwise, people would be sitting there constantly waiting, right? It wouldn't work very effectively. So I guess, as a facilitator, are there things that you wish that people would do to kind of draw out more of the introverts that are in the group?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question. So my perspective, and this is kind of informed by this book, Quiet, is that the superpower of introverts is that they can they can laser focus on a problem and stick with it long after other people have moved on. And the challenge, so you're talking about facilitating these large group settings, and I think the challenge there is that superpower of focusing on a problem and being in the zone with it doesn't necessarily lend itself to those group situations, right? So how do you deal with that? And I think that one approach for somebody like me, something that I would find really helpful, is if you were facilitating a meeting, to focus that meeting as much as possible on really clearly defining and articulating what the problems are that need to be solved, right? And just making that as clear as humanly possible, and assigning responsibility so that when I go offline and I recharge and I have time to get in the zone and really chew on that problem, I know exactly what it is I'm trying to solve, and that I'm responsible for it. So when the group comes back together, we have something really productive to talk about, rather than just sort of a set of ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And, I know that, it's easy to say that, you could easily point out introverts or people that are, less, able to kind of jump forward. But I also, the one key reason why I really picked up on on these tweets from you, is just this idea around, hey, introverts aren't necessarily always easy to spot. and,
Right.
and they're kind of, they might be bridging, where they're, at times, outwardly spoken, but also at other times, very focused, to your point. And I think it's a really key thing for anybody that is in business to just kind of understand and respect.
Yeah, and I think that's particularly true in, biotech is full of scientists and engineers. Like that's really where the ideas come from. That's where the technology comes from. And I think oftentimes people who gravitate towards STEM fields are introverts, because they do like to focus on the technical information and solving problems. And that's part of this, going back to the top, this is part of that transition from academia into biotech, is learning those skills that enable you to work in that team effectively. Maybe we're not muscles that you flexed a lot in your academic career.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny because education, I feel like, at least my education anyway, in a lot of cases, it was easy to kind of, stay in your own bubble and not get stretched. Of course, there were times where you had to give presentations and things like that, even in my education. But the amount of time that you would go where you didn't have to say anything publicly, to all of a sudden, bouncing to, an area where you're having to present something effectively to teams, is quite a stretch for a lot of people, that are more introverted.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would add to it, there's an element of having complete or incomplete information, right? So in my academic life as a student, when I had my own project, I could kind of work with something or sit on it until it was fully baked and ready to roll out and show to people. And I would have thought through all the potential questions that could have come up, and I have this quiver full of answers to shoot out at people when they ask them. But in my job today, that's not really how it works. I mean, things are moving too quickly. Oftentimes we have really complex problems that we have to make decisions on, and we have incomplete data. And you have to learn to get comfortable with that, and learn to be comfortable not only talking about it and presenting it and saying, I don't know, when you don't know something, but not, having a willingness to go forward with sort of the highest probability option that you have, knowing full well that you may be making the wrong decision, but a decision has to be made.
Yeah. So one last question with regards to the tweets that you put out. So why Twitter and why not anywhere else?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think a couple of reasons. One is accessibility. I think that the nice thing about social media is that anyone can access that information. So if I was a graduate student and I saw, okay, who's this guy who's working in a biotech company talking about what it's like to transition into a company like that, I could access that for free. It costs me no money at all. And it's easily accessible, easily digestible, right? It's 280 characters at a time. You can just read the ones that resonate with you and like them and move on with your life. You don't have to commit to either the financial burden of buying a physical book or, reading 200 pages worth of advice. And, I have another tweet where I tweeted out a picture of a stack of management books that I've read, and it's, taller than my dog in the living room. And, the thing is that they all have different things to say, right? So I think it's really useful to take what I've learned, to take what other people have learned, and digest that down into a bite-sized piece of information that you can access on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just an amazing tool. I mean, I certainly enjoyed Twitter myself, and I know quite a few of my guests have said similar things that, hey, there is a really great place to kind of connect with people, that are in your space more or less. So there are 3 questions that I'd like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, as someone who works in biotechnology, what really inspires me is reading about the pioneers of the field, right? People who founded Genentech and Amgen and Biogen and these sorts of places. For a couple of reasons. One, they've been successful, and it's really exciting to hear about that pioneering spirit that they had. But also because it's science is difficult. Whether you're doing it in academics or you're doing it in biotech and in drug development, it's really difficult. And sometimes you run into, not sometimes, you're always running into challenges that you have to overcome. And so it's really inspiring to read about people who've persevered and have not only succeeded, but have brought products to market that have really changed people's lives.
Yeah. And what concerns you?
Yeah, I think along the themes of what we've been talking about and some of the interactions I've had with members of the scientific community through Twitter and other places, I'm a bit concerned that there's a cultural divide between academia and the biotech industry or biopharma. And it's not absolute, right? There are interactions, there are points of connection, but my view is that we're all part of a larger ecosystem. Right, that we all, there are basic researchers and applied researchers, and I think that we would benefit from communicating with each other more, understanding each other's points of view, and work well together. I think too often you hear academics talking about working in biotech as being on the dark side, and you hear people as a hiring manager in academia or in a biotech company, oftentimes candidates are dismissed for being, quote, too academic, unquote, and I think we would do ourselves a service by integrating those cultures a bit better and more effectively training the next generation of scientific leaders.
Yeah, it provides definitely an interesting challenge, but at the same time, I'm in Colorado. We have a really good, biotech foundation growing in this area. And I know whenever I, visit different businesses, I certainly see an awful lot of, people who've spent a lot of time in academia, but now they are transitioning. So who knows, maybe we will see that shift in the future.
Yeah, I certainly hope so.
And what excites you?
Well, what really excites me, and the reason that I'm working in biotech, the reason I'm in Synlogic is translating basic science into making it real, right? Turning things into products and drugs that will ultimately help patients and make their lives better. And that's why I made this transition, is that I really wanted to be part of bringing those, and like you mentioned earlier, but with the microbiome therapies, I was in the microbiome field. I want to be part of bringing that to life and into something real. So that's what really excites me. And I think at Synlogic, we have a few irons in the fire where we have opportunity to do that. So I'm really excited about a couple of things that are coming up. We have 2 major clinical readouts that are expected in the second half of this year, where we have the opportunity to show proof of concept for a live engineered bacterial therapeutic in 2 different metabolic diseases. So I'm super excited to see what comes from that.
Sounds tremendously exciting. And so with that, I just wanted to mention really quickly, for those of you who want to look at Mark's tweets, you can certainly visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com, and you will see a link to all of his information there. And with that, Mark, I wanted to thank you for being a guest today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Don. This has been a lot of fun.